Hi, this is my third video, number 3, and in this video I'd like to share to you exactly what took place at the time that the first 3 miracles happened back in 2002. As you remember, there was a flash of white light, a miracle from the candle, and a miracle when I went to God's Word and found Psalm 34:14, depart from evil, and I quit my job the next day. Well, let me give you a little background on where I come from, because this is important. I worked in the film business for some time, and while I was working in the film business, it wasn't a big deal to be working with different movie stars. And when I came to Malibu, I started fresh. I started all over. I started doing construction work, and my first employment came out of working at getting a couple jobs out of the labor exchange, in which I hooked up with a big construction company. And now, instead of working with movie stars on sets, I was working on their houses. And that's when I experienced those 3 miracles in 2002. The flash of white light, the candle, and the creaking trailer. And when those things happened to me, and I quit my job the next day, I met a guy on the beach, and I started to help this guy. And his name was Steve. And Steve was helping me. I was trying to figure out how to support myself and not fall behind on rent. But eventually I was falling more and more behind on rent. At a time, at 3 months that I was behind on rent, my landlord came up to me and asked me if I wanted an ocean view spot. And I was a little bit caught off guard and surprised, but I responded by, "I'll take it." So I moved my trailer up on top of the mountain. And it didn't take long for me to realize that my feelings inside about this potentially being a not so good of a decision, when he asked me originally, when I was 3 months behind on rent, if I wanted the spot, it started to reveal itself that my direct neighbor had a daughter that grew up on the ranch, and she had grown up, and she had married, and she had a house on the East Coast, but that house burned down in a fire. And now they were back into Malibu looking for a place to stay, but they didn't have any money. And every day I was getting a phone call from the landlord telling me that I couldn't do this or I couldn't do that. My neighbor was watching every step that I was taking, and it was a complete nightmare. And I was praying to God whether he or not he wanted me to stay there, and he kept telling me that he did want me to stay there. So I was trying to figure out a way to stay there. And my neighbors, during the time when I was on the bottom part of the mountain, there was 3 people, Darby, Bill, and Carlotta, and they all worked at the Do It Center. And Bill was going to the manager and telling him, "I know this guy that can do the job as the lumber person." And I went down to do an interview, and I told him my experience and that I could work there 6 months to a year. And I didn't get a call from them. I found out that they hired somebody else, and the person that they hired, he filed for disability within a month. I found out that the manager thought I was too skinny for the job. That's why he didn't hire me. But eventually he hired me. And when he hired me, I was making money, and I was giving all my check money to pay where I gotten behind. At this point, it was about 4 months, so I was a total of 4 months behind on rent. Let me just explain a little bit. The way that the rental agreement stated was that if you were behind on rent in the first month, every day would be $5 a day times 30. On the second month, it would be every day times $10, and so on. It went $15 and then $20. So because I was 4 months behind on rent, it was $20 a day late fees for 30 days, plus all the back fees on top of it. And I had to pay all those fees up front in order to get set right. I was in a very difficult position, and God was telling me He wanted me to stay there, that there was something that He wanted me to do. And I said, okay, well, I don't see how it's going to work out. But as I was making payments, I was saving receipts, and after 6 months of doing work at the Do It Center, I looked at all the paperwork, and still the renter or the landlord wasn't allowing me. It was still a problem. He still didn't want to say that everything was paid for after 6 months. In fact, when I looked at the paperwork, if I looked at the numbers, it said that I was still at the point of being behind on rent at the fourth month. At the fourth month that I was behind on rent. So I said, man, I got to do something. So I filed the small claims court at the city of Malibu, and I served his wife at that time, and he came up to me a day later and said, listen, I don't want to go to court, and we settled it, and we figured everything out, so I got to stay there. At that time, also, Steve came back into Malibu, and he was staying with me for a short time before I told him that he's got to go. So he got a trailer on the other side of the hill, and he could only support himself for maybe like 2 or 3 months until he had to leave, and that family moved into that trailer. And it was a funny feeling that I had that they wanted to move into my trailer, but God was watching over me, and I didn't lose my trailer, and I got to stay there. And as I'm working at the Do It Center, I'm building up clients. I'm getting more proficient with my skills. I'm making more connections. And when the year started to come closer to an end, as you remember, I said I wanted to work there 6 months to a year when I started working at the Do It Center. Well, when it started getting closer to that year, the season was slowing down, and I was sitting outside on a pallet, and I was thinking to myself, I was actually praying to God, and I was saying, God, how long do you want me to work here? And I could see 2 leaves on the ground in the parking lot about 40 feet away. And I looked up into the trees, and I saw no leaves up in the trees and only 2 leaves anywhere. And they were sitting right on the other side of the parking lot. Well, I watched the wind blow those leaves closer to me, and I thought to myself that I bet you those leaves are going to come to my foot and then stop. And sure enough, that's what they did. They blew to my feet and stopped. But when they stopped, on the other side of the courtyard where I work, there's a clock, and that clock started tolling. And I started thinking to myself, time, 2 leaves. And I thought to myself, it's time to leave. So I stood up right there in the parking lot. I walked straight to the manager's office, and I told him I put in my 2 weeks' notice. It wasn't until I got a phone call from him to ask me if I could work one more day that I found out that the day that I started was the same day that I was supposed to when I gave my 2 weeks notice. 2 weeks ended on the same day as the same day I started. And God knows what he's doing, and I was just obedient and listening to him. I quit my job and I started working in places like the Malibu Lake, and working on beach houses in Malibu, and growing my business. And I didn't have to go back to the Do-It Center, and things were good. After all this, God asked me to tear down my house and then move to Lancaster into the desert. And I didn't know why he was asking me to do that. I just knew that he told me to do that, so that's what I did. And it was a hard thing to do based off of all the pain that I went through to stay here in Malibu. But I followed God, and within 1 month, I got my motorcycle for free. And the recession started in 2008, and I started to need to come back to Malibu to do some work. And one of the first things I did was I went back to the ranch to see my old friends. And as I come through the gate, I run into an old friend, and we're talking, and he's telling me that the SWAT was up here and that they're going to be closing down the ranch. You see, the whole reason why SWAT was up there was because the landlord had problems with the cops and the city, but particularly the cops, because he tried to sell some guns, and the city wouldn't go up there without SWAT. So every time the city came up there, they came up with about 15 to 20 guys with submachine guns, and it was a big problem every time they came up there. Fortunately, though, that I wasn't there any times that they came, and my friend was warning me that they might be showing up again. So I said goodbye to my friend. I drove my motorcycle into the trailer park and to another friend of mine, and I parked my bike, and I looked up on the hill where Steve had his trailer up there, and where those family moved into that trailer. That family was now loading up all their belongings into a U-Haul truck and moving. And shortly thereafter that, everybody pretty much had to leave. When I came back into Malibu, things were getting better for me. I got a better job and a better living situation, and I found out in the paper that the landlord got slapped with a $4 million lawsuit from the city, and now they're taking his property away from him. Like all those years he had been taking property from people, now his property was being taken away from him. And I don't think that's by accident. I think just like the Jews that were enslaved in Egypt, God hears the cry of the poor. And God is looking for guys or men and women that are willing to fight for justice and fight for him on that front, because his heart is for the poor. If we can step outside of ourselves and see the calling that he has for us and be obedient, take those steps when he calls us to do them, we're going to see miracles. We're going to see great testimonies. It's God's heart to reveal his nature and who he is. So thank you for letting me share this part of my testimony, part 3. Look for other videos to come. I got some more testimony and some sermons that I plan on doing. God bless you. Thank you.